Good morning, everybody, and thanks very much for joining this morning's webinar. I'd like to just start while we're waiting for everybody to join to introduce Matt, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us this morning. For anybody that doesn't know, Matt is the former director for MediaZoo and has recently set up Changeably, which is his own consultancy, where he is providing learning support to a variety of businesses across the UK. So Matt, without further ado, actually one other thing that I did want to mention quickly, just for anybody to let them know that we've got a number of learning network of events that are upcoming. I'll pop the link to our events page in the chat. I'm also going to enable chat in a minute so other people can contribute. Please feel free to participate during the webinar using the chat function. And if anybody's got any direct questions for Matt, feel free to drop them into the Q&A and we can address them at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate you asking me to do this. It's always good to reconnect with you and catch up. And thanks everybody for joining. I should probably say I wasn't the director of MediaZoo. I wish I was. I'd have got paid a bit more. I was the director of learning. So for anyone who doesn't know me, my background is in learning design, and I was responsible for creating a lot of bad e-learning. And I hit a point in my career where I realized I needed to change that, and I really looked hard at my practice and worked hard and kind of generated a whole new way of working. And I've sort of spent my career since then trying to undo the damage that I did. And this session is about some of the things that I've experienced through my agency life and working with loads of different clients, sort of generally medium to large size corporates. But this is my opinion. It's from my experience. So please do ask questions, challenge, share, whatever you want. The more interactive we can make this, the more fun it will be. But I guess we shall get started, and we'll have a little play around, and I'll show you what I mean by insight-led design. So first of all, we should probably start with what you will learn in this. Actually, we're running a bit late, aren't we? So I'll leave that. Oh, you probably don't need to see this either, do you? Actually, I forgot this was in there. Anyway, right. The point of that is the Aerosmith principle. Thanks to Dave Grohl. Don't bore us. Get to the chorus. How many times have I seen content where you've spent 5 to 10 minutes looking at stuff that isn't actually relevant to what you're trying to get people to achieve before you get to the content? And so something I love is the Aerosmith principle, because their songs are mostly all chorus. They just get in, bang, there you go. It's what you need to do. So it's something I like to think about a lot with my design. And you'll see me, if you ever work with me, I always sit there and say, like, if those, why are those learning objectives there? If someone's in the content and they don't know why they're there, you've already failed. So it's something that just bugs me a bit. And I guess to the point of some of the fallacies like I was talking about. But first, I need you to help me with a bit of an exercise. So if you can get a pen and paper, I'm hoping some of you got a pen and paper or something, or just use your minds. If you've got a good imagination, I'd like you to draw a circle, and be about the size of your palm, ish, like that. It doesn't need to be too big, and it doesn't need to be perfect at all. Has everybody drawn a circle, or do I need to give people a few minutes? Okay. I'm going with Fiona. Fiona's done. Hi, Fiona, by the way. Brilliant. And Kim's here. Hi, Kim. Oh, Matt. Wow. There's loads of people. So it could be an egg. That's fine. It's okay for this exercise. Next thing you need to do is draw an equilateral triangle inside the circle or egg. It might not be an equilateral triangle, but it'll still work. Everybody done that? The Deathly Hallows, yeah. It's actually a Harry Potter event, this. Illuminati, it could be. In fact, there was something I'll mention later on that, I don't know if you know the Illuminati, they used to whisper in people's ears, the secret is, there is no secret. And that's like my whole take on learning design. You've just got to do the work, man. there's no silver bullet. Anyway, right, so you've drawn a triangle inside your circle. The next thing you're going to do is draw a triangle a third of the size on each of the sides of the triangle. So you've got a pentagram going on. We're going to have a bit of a seance. So when you've done that, it's too early in the week. I don't think it's ever too early for either a Negroni or a seance, and I'm sticking by that. When you've done that, the next thing is triangles a third of the size again. Please don't quote me on that. Triangles a third of the size again on the edge of each of the triangles. And then when you've got those, do triangles a third of the size of the other triangles on the outsides of those triangles. And when you've done that, triangles a third of the size of those triangles. And you'll see that my design skills have limited me to not going that far down this route. But you can do an endless number of triangles getting smaller on the outsides of each of the edges. It's infinite because you can just zoom in further and further and further, and it will never, ever break that circle that you drew originally. And it's part of chaos theory, and they're called Koch snowflakes, I think. And it's very similar to how you can measure a country. The further you zoom in, the more jagged the coastline gets. So the coastline of a country is actually infinite, which is pretty nuts. But yeah, with this kind of approach, you can have the most insanely complex and endless amount of information, but it never ever leaves the circle. And it just goes on, and you just go deeper and deeper and deeper. And so we're moving from a seance into hypnosis now. But you get the point, right? It just gets more and more complex, but it's always within that bounded circle. And the point of doing that, if you imagine that bounded circle as your organization, and then all of those points and the endless amount of information is the people inside it and how they think and how they feel and what they're doing and what they need to achieve and what their manager's saying. Hopefully it stopped, Kate, unless your internet out in Devon is running a bit slow today. But there's just this endless amount of thoughts, feelings, and stuff going on within a business that you can't necessarily see at firsthand. And so it's a really nice explanation from when I saw it about like how complex an organization is. It's just endless, but it's all within that bounded structure. Excuse me. Do I need to talk about complex versus complicated, or is everybody pretty clear on the difference between the two and why I specifically said complex for an organization? And I guess just say yes, please, if you'd like me to elaborate on that. If not, oh, rats. Okay, I thought I'd get away with it. Okay, a complicated problem is something that is difficult to do but has a solution. So engineering. I think the easiest way I always look at it is like planes. It's really, really hard to get something that flies. So it's a complicated problem to create a machine that can fly. It's really, really hard, but we can do it. A complex problem is emergent, and the people taking part, and I'll say people because it's easier, obviously have their own agency, so they can do things that you can't predict. And that's why people and businesses are complex environments. We can't predict them, but a complicated environment, we should be able to predict it. It's just going to be very difficult. That's the difference between the two. And we operate in L&D in a complex environment. And you know the drill, right? When we have a project, we're trying to please the individuals and we're trying to create change and help them grow and develop them. But we've got to help the managers out. But we've also got to focus on what the business is trying to achieve and the stakeholders and the shareholders and the board. But you're also trying to deliver quality content. It's a really, really difficult job. And sometimes I think, we should pat ourselves on the back a little bit because it's way harder than anybody thinks it is. And certainly I think than we're given credit for by other parts of the business for sure. But the problem we've got is you've got this complex world. And yet in L&D, it seems that we just have this solution that's this fixed engineering solution as if learning is complicated. We're going to deliver this thing to solve that. And it falls short. And whether you believe the statistics or not, most of the stuff we deliver has got poor engagement or doesn't have any real outcomes or benefit beyond maybe a bit of psychological safety. And it's because I think we have this kind of fixed view of learning design. And I know a lot of you on this call don't. So I'm probably preaching to the choir. But there is this kind of idea of, can you just give us a course? And maybe this is part of the message for today. It's not even about showing you new things. It's about, can we get some energy together and get a bit of a backbone. And so the next time we run into a project and you've got a stakeholder who's trying to push you into something, you just go, no, you know what? We need to actually do this differently. We need to lead with insight. But here's a question for everybody before I go on any more. I'd love to hear what you think are some of the biggest mistakes we make in learning. But don't do learning styles, please. I think we've overdone that one. I'll write a piece of code that says every time learning styles appear, it will just change the word to preferences and everybody will be happy. Matt, yeah, definitely designing for ourselves. That's so easy to get sucked into as well, isn't it? When you're kind of in the zone and in the place, and then you take it out to users and you realize you totally missed the mark. One hit solution, Sheridan. That's what keeps me up at night. Not clearly defining the outcomes. Pippa, it seems like you've already looked at the slides. Thank you. Kim, putting in too much filler. Yep, absolutely. I mean, that's one of my biggest bugbears, I guess is the word. I'm constantly taking content out and challenging people and saying, does that relate to the objectives? If it doesn't, why is it in this content? And it's fighting SMEs, right? And senior managers and like what, they're trying to put irrelevant things into the content that's going to take away from the messaging. Another silly phrase I like to use, which is stolen from Yngwie Malmsteen, is like more is more, but like more is more to forget, and that's something we often kind of don't pay attention to in L&D. It's like, here's all the information, but even in like a face-to-face session, people are going to probably remember being there. So that focus is trying to kind of like, how do you tag something to the feeling of being there rather than try and deliver all the information when they're there. We assume people care. Robert, you're another person who's been looking at my slides. Making the learning hard to access. Peter, that's like massive, right? Something someone said to me once was, what we do the hard work so the user doesn't have to. And that's from a tech perspective, making sure that the click-throughs work and that stuff is not hidden behind a really bad search engine on your LMS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or that you don't have to log into your LMS and stuff like that, doing these little bits that make the UX just smoother and easier and better. Assuming the audience knows nothing. Terry, that's a good one. There's loads. This is great. Delivering what we've been asked for instead of finding out the real problem. Paula, nailed it. No follow-ups. Yeah. Different types of learning and more effective than one. Yeah. I mean, that's similar to that kind of one hit, right? It's like we launched this course, not measuring success. Emily, yes, yes, yes. There's so many. Okay, this is great. You've outdone me completely. Sam, we might have to capture some of these and I'll write them up into some sort of bibliography of mistakes in learning. Thanks. Manage your assumption that training fixes everything. What do you mean we're delivering things that isn't training, Kim? That's never happened before. We could go on for this for ages. I'm just looking at the time. I'm going to share 3 things that really bug me quickly, right? And these are quite contentious, so please feel free to challenge them. Instructional design. It becomes this rigid set of tick box things that people do. And it's the thing that we all follow, right? And yet we create a lot of this content that's terrible. And I can't help but connect those 2 things. I know really that it's bad instructional design, but you know, it's just created this legacy. And obviously from it coming from a history of being classroom based and military, where you've got you can assume motivation and you've got focus and attention because you're in a classroom. It doesn't apply quite so well to digital. And obviously, you know, Stella Collins and Patsy Shank and other people have written really good books about how you can apply that to digital with the flexibility, but we still miss it. And I still come across people who are early in their career who have been given this kind of set of tools and they follow it verbatim, and it just creates just messes. Not saying that theory is fundamental for anyone who's new in their career. You can't get away from that. You've got to understand psychology and the theory of education and the application of that. But because we're in a complex environment, you can't trust it to work. We have to test it and find out what happens and adapt and adjust and keep things relevant to our audience. I've just seen something, still more comments coming in of different things. The other thing that really, really annoys me, interactivity, right? Active learning is not clicking stuff on a slide. Engaging someone and getting them to pay attention and focus and care isn't going to happen by hiding content behind another box. All you're doing is making your page look less busy and trying to like the fact of how much writing you've got in your interactive content, in my opinion. So that kind of, you know, I see that a lot, and it's something that really kills me. Learners are lazy. So are learning designers, to be fair. And the third one that's my real kind of, I don't know, it's the thing that I really care about, and anyone who's worked with me or talks to me knows that I talk about this stuff all the time. But using learning outcomes, you know, putting them on a slide doesn't magically make people learn stuff. I understand in a face-to-face environment, it can help set people up from a mindset perspective. When you're sticking them on a piece of e-learning where it says you will understand, you know, it's got no relevance to actually applying stuff and doing things in the practical application. And it gives people an excuse. Again, it's doing it badly, but to create outcomes or objectives that actually aren't behavioral. So they're not focused on doing anything, which means you're probably not going to be able to measure them. And probably they have nothing to do with the business goals or the wider strategy. And so when you get down to it, when someone says, why are we paying 100 grand for this program? You can't explain why, apart from because this person asked me for it and they have the money. And that's like shocking for me. And you know, and that's sort of what I'm working with businesses to do, is to really kind of focus on why they exist and why their project exists, and don't do the stuff that isn't adding value and they can't explain. And you can save so much time, resource, effort, and money, and deliver less crap to people. So we're kind of declogging the airways as well as making our lives easier, and then focusing on what you do deliver to get more impact with that. So getting more from less, opposite from Yngwie Malmsteen. And Yngwie Malmsteen, I can't pronounce his name very well. He's a Swedish guitarist. And so what happens if we don't have clear goals? Effort can look a lot like success. And this is one of my favorite pictures. The gate that you can climb over is another one, the security gate with rungs. I'm obsessed with Don Norman and Norman doors, and how, you know, there's all these doors that have to say push or pull because they're too confusing for us to use. It's, you know, it's crazy. I love that kind of design stuff where it's like, hold on, we sat down and go, what are we trying to achieve here? And do some, it's design thinking essentially and product design to figure out how to do it properly. You can't reach a cash machine. Hey, I mean, the engineer put a cash machine in the wall, right? Box ticked, program launched. We have got leadership programs out there. But what did we do? We didn't really think about it that much from a point of view of the audience, and they can't use it. And this happens over and over again. And I'm probably just complaining now, but it does, you know, it maintains an industry, right? And I've had a career out of it, so I shouldn't complain too much. But these are the kind of pitfalls it's so easy to fall into. And what ends up happening? You get that eye roll. And I've seen it so many times, and I've been involved in programs where I've seen it, you know, and so I'm as guilty as anyone. But you've got people who, who just got married. It's raining outside and they had to walk from somewhere, or their manager's annoying them, or someone brought donuts in and no one saved one for her, or, you know, someone's just left the team and she's doing more work, but no one's kind of asking, can I help? And what we're doing, launching training at them, training. People have got other things to do. One of the most freeing things that have happened in my career was realizing that L&D isn't that important to most people in the business. And almost like that existential idea of life is that when you realize that people don't care about us, it's actually really freeing, and you can be much more creatively open and playful with what we do, because you've got the opportunity to wow people and surprise them. But the only way you can do that is with insight, right? And without insight, here's the fact, right? You're risking your budget, your reputation, and your success. And they can be pretty big things if you're talking about a leadership program that the CEO has signed off on, you know, and it's on your gut instinct, because we're not getting the insight about what we're trying to achieve, who we're doing it for. We're kind of going, yeah, we need to do a leadership course. Cool. I know some providers who can deliver a leadership course. They're really good. And we wonder why we keep falling flat. It's really, really powerful if you know, just thinking that what we risk based on our instinct and our assumptions. But there is something we can do about it. It's about getting insight. And before I go on anymore, I thought it'd be cool to kind of stop and maybe ask you guys and girls, what do you do at the start of a project to get more insight, to understand the challenge and the people? Because it's a really complicated thing, right? It can be crazy. But there are some pretty straightforward things we can do. And I know there's loads of things that we do already do. But my argument here is that we say we do them, but you know that when there's a tight budget or the timelines are tight, they're the first things that get dropped, as do the pilots and the testing. You know, giving ample time for insight and discovery is the difference in designing really impactful and engaging content. And we don't do it often enough. So Terry, where you say, what's the discovery call? What goes into it? Fiona said, yeah, asking if we do nothing. That's one of my favorite questions, right? Because often the answer is, I don't know. And then you look at it and you're like, well, actually, we'll probably save X amount of money by doing nothing, because this training isn't going to help because it's not a training need. I love your caveat, Matt. In an ideal world, focus groups are really helpful. They can't always be practical. And here's a really good point that a friend mentioned to me earlier, is obviously at scale, this stuff gets even harder as well. So sometimes you need to just use samples, and you do need to make assumptions, but we often don't do this part, right? chatter, Kim, yeah, right, listening, just going and listening to people. And yeah, seeing the outcome adds value, and that's huge. I hate working on programs that I don't think are adding value to the business or the team, or don't have a reason to exist. And it kind of, it frustrates me, but it also drives me to really make an effort to try and make something within the constraints that I've got the best that I can. Mapping assumptions, Lewis, yeah, well, spoken like a product designer there. You can do that kind of facts, beliefs, and assumptions, and you can start figuring out what's real, what's mystical, what can we actually play with, or what can we test as well, because that brings out a whole loads of ways of doing things like that. But using some social platforms to do polling, yeah, watching, isn't that crazy? Like, could I go and observe someone doing their job? Do you remember, when you ask that to a client, they freak out. Or, oh, we can't get hold of that. We can't, there's all these kind of weird barriers that the plan and what I want to do is kind of inspire us to go and try and break down the barriers and get that stuff happening. Because it is possible. And the key bit for me is, once you've got that definition of a problem, and I say famous, Peter Manish Reva, apologies for quoting him on here, but he did say to me once, he's like, if you can't measure the problem, how do you know it's a problem? And I thought it was a really, really interesting reflection. I'm not saying that everything has to be quantifiable, but so often we're creating content based on people's assumptions, beliefs, and we can take that as a starting point, but we need to figure out what they're basing on and why it's happening. And then we need to go and talk to the audience to get insight. How are they feeling? What are people doing? What's the culture? What's the environment like? You know the drill. It's all in there in kind of performance consulting and instructional design. But kind of adding this kind of behavioral science lens of really starting to try and understand your audience from a perspective of what they're not telling you. So like Kim said, listening and just observing and trying to find a way that you can get in with them without looking like someone who's part of that team who's going to be judging them. So there's all those kind of ways of exploring it, but taking it a bit further to really try and understand these people. Do they like you? Do they like the L&D team? Do they trust them? Because if they don't trust them, it will radically transform how you need to approach your project, right? Do they believe in you? Do they choose you? I know these are quite kind of philosophical questions, and these are kind of questions I use more with bigger change programs, but it's still relevant for L&D in the fact that, do you really know who your audience are and really get what they're feeling and thinking? And we often don't, and that's exactly why we launch these tone deaf programs. And it's why we need to start with insight, and it's all about root cause analysis, and it's all about project definition, right? You know this stuff, Terry, exactly, right? I'm speaking to the choir here, but it's that thing that we just need to keep pushing this and keep challenging our stakeholders, because it will just get eroded. I see it all the time. I've been part of it, right? I have to share my guilt, because from being in an agency, sometimes you're there going, well, we've got to just do the work to take the money. And sometimes that happens. But I always kind of would try and offer that, here's option B to the client, just to say, hey, we could try it this way. And if they chose not to, at least I kind of said my piece and stood up and said, I think there's another way of doing it. So I'd keep my boss happy by the money coming in, but I'd keep myself happy by just highlighting that I think maybe this project could be different. I'm sure you all know what 5DI is. Thank you, Nick Shackleton-Jones, for taking a really cool concept from kind of product design and giving it the L&D kind of spin. And it maps really, really nicely into Double Diamond, which is a kind of a design thinking tool from, I think it's the British Design Council, something like that. But it gives a nice visual representation of the phases. But this is what I'm talking about, is the define and discover stage. The first two parts of the project is the bit that we always skip and rush and don't put enough time and effort and care into, clarifying what the problem is and what we're trying to achieve. Something has a reason to exist, and that is game changing from a perspective of how you then move forwards. But then that discovery, actually taking time, where it says there, divergent thinking, to go outwards and look and explore and see what's possible and get to know the audience and where they work and how they work and the managers. And you can obviously scale this up or down depending on the size of your project. But it's just, I'm just hammering the same point again, but I think it's just so important that doing these things before you come back and try and diagnose the problem is the difference between poor and great content, in my experience, and certainly with engagement, and certainly with getting people to appreciate the content and making it relevant to what they're trying to achieve, so you're not just pouring more stuff at them. And you all know, and I certainly know from an agency perspective, we'll sell the diagnosis before we even know the problem. And it's a strange phenomenon where you're pitching a solution, but you know that you're going to go in and do a discovery period beforehand. Trying to sell a discovery period to a client is difficult. When you say, hey, cool, don't worry, what we're going to do is charge you money, ask you a few questions and tell you that what you thought you wanted to do probably isn't the right thing and we need to tell you something different. But when you get those relationships with clients where you can have that approach, it's fantastic, because you just get a feel for L&D becoming this kind of brand that people want to engage with, rather than these people who just stick stuff on an LMS and force me to do it. Pippa, I'll share the slides if you want. So this model is kind of appropriated from Nick Shackleton-Jones and Charlie and Morton's Solve Together business as well, where I've kind of taken different bits and added my own overlays. Yeah, absolutely. I'll share these slides so you can take the time to look at them. And if there's any questions afterwards, feel free to get in touch, because these things are evolving. I change these models, I change the wording. I'm always updating what I do and how I approach things, because like I said at the start, it's just my opinion based on my experience, whereas you guys and everybody has different clients, different experiences, different ways of doing it. There is no right way to do learning design. And that's, it makes it really fun, but really difficult. But one of the challenges within the discovery phase is that it's kind of open. And it's really difficult to pin down, well, what am I looking for? Yeah, I can go and talk to the audience, but if you go and have a nice chat to the audience, you'll have a nice chat. Or, so it's about asking really good questions and planning and things like that. But one tool that I do find really, really valuable to help just focus on my thinking and what I'm trying to figure out is COM-B. And this is a tool from behavioral science. And I absolutely recommend, if you've got a big program, to bring in a behavioral scientist to help you with these kind of programs, because I've worked with a few and it's amazing how they approach getting human data and turning it into a model and presenting it back, and then looking at external research to see how it's been done before, to see options for change. It's very, very, very powerful for immediate shifting. But it's a tool that I find in a smaller project I can use just to keep me centered on what I'm trying to do. And COM-B, if you haven't come across it, the idea is that behavior in a single person, behavior change, is the culmination of someone's capability. So that's their knowledge and their skills, the opportunities. And so that will be environment, culture, manager, all those kind of bits, and their motivation, both intrinsic and extrinsic. And it's a collection of all those things. So when you're talking to the audience, you need to be trying to find out, well, do they know what they need to know and can they do it? A classic example I always get was someone asking for sales training. And I was just like, well, what's the problem with it? Oh, they're not doing these things. And I said, well, if you gave them a test, what would happen? And they said, well, they'd pass. So it's like, I don't think this is a training problem. It's, they've got the capability, they know how to do it, they're just not doing it. So you get into that kind of opportunity. What's the culture like? What are you doing as a manager? What are you allowing? What's the office like? Are there no windows and people feel really sad? There's all those little things that can totally affect how we act as humans, and they're all, the context can change everything. And then the hardest bit is the motivation, because trying to get people to share that is quite tricky. But asking some of those deeper questions about how people feel about work and how they approach things, and almost taking it away from the content, but trying to understand who these people are, will give you a picture about what you need to create, which will be vastly different from the brief you got, just by going and talking to your audience and exploring the culture and the environment that people work in. Like, game-changing stuff, like from using kind of approaches like this. My old job at MediaZoo, we totally transformed engagement for a number of different brands, and doing just asking questions, like saving money because you don't need to do a program because you found there's another one running in a different part of the business, just by asking simple questions, and not just launching stuff because someone asked. So I really recommend using Combi, but very lightly, and using a professional to help you with Combi when you're dealing with something that's a bit more complex, because there's a whole piece about behavior wheels and theory behind that I am not, certainly not trained enough or expert enough to be talking about. So sharing this with a big caveat of use at your own peril. But it is really helpful thinking about, can they do the job? Are they able to do the job in the fact of where they work? And do they care about being there? Because if they don't care about being there, that's going to affect how you need to talk to these people. And a lot of this is comms, and the crossover, in my view, of training and comms is massive. But that's where you're going to get people to stand up, pay attention. It's how you're going to inspire change. And yes, sometimes a curriculum, you need to break it down into, okay, I need to get people to pay attention. I need to create action. I need to do some things to get people on the hook for this before I deliver a curriculum. There are some places where onboarding, you join us, great. You kind of got this assumed motivation because you can throw anything at them. But very quickly after 2 weeks in, they're doing their job and they haven't got time to do this other stuff. So having this extra insight will allow you to shift your narrative and your story to fit the people that you need to fit it for. And you have to make calls about, if you're delivering this globally, do you deliver one version? Do you deliver 20 versions? All of this is kind of budget and context dependent. And part of why I think our job is so great and so difficult, because every project will be different because you're creating it for that unique audience. But one thing that I'd like to do to simplify some of this is this little model. Another model, another 4-step process, right? But as we've been talking about, it all starts leading with insight, right? You need to know what the problem is and understand the audience and why you're creating this and what they care about. Then you can craft the vision, which is the story of, we're going to go from here to here. So the journey, the learning journey that people are going to go on. It's only after insight can you create that, because you understand who you're working and what they need. Then you're going to go and tell the story, and that's designing your content. I like saying telling the story because it's the way we evolved to share information, and you can share really complex cultural and social ideas that are really memorable by using stories. And the final bit is the amplification, and that really is kind of the application stage, but also the social element. How do you get this to be self-supporting and to kind of continue a life beyond the training event? And it's just a simple 4-part piece that I know there's loads of work in each one, but rather than having a super complex model, I can just have something nice and simple just to nudge me. Have I got my insight? Have I really got the vision down? Do I know the story, and can we share it? And are we sharing it? And how do we get people engaging and kind of amplify what's happening? Because the alternative is something like this, which I shared on LinkedIn a while ago, and I constantly come back to it and add stuff and remove stuff. And it's trying to codify how L&D is delivered in a business. Like the green boxes are kind of your learning need inputs. The yellow boxes, they're sort of things that happen that you have no control over within the business. Then the blue bits would be like L&D or HR interventions. And the white boxes are kind of tools and processes. But every time I talk to someone about this, they can take one part and tear it open and create levels of complexity below. If you just look at 5DI, just defined by itself, will have a whole number of activities and things to do. So trying to codify L&D as a model is really, really difficult, which is why I've kind of trimmed that down to that 4-stage thing, just to remind me of the things that I need to do, but in a easier concept. It's almost doing L&D on myself, right? Branching and connecting things so that all I need to remember is those 4 steps. But when I'm in each step, I know that there's a lot more I need to do under each bit. Hiding the complexity to make me think it's easier. I've talked a lot there, apologies. But is there anything from what people have shared and what I've said that you think you might try and do differently or tackle or challenge your stakeholders to do in any future projects? Or anything you've been thinking about doing or would like to? Yeah, Matt, the crossover of comms and learning, it's great when you have permission. I try and act first and ask for forgiveness later, but often I get pulled back before we can start. Yeah, Terry, pushing back, right? When was the last time you said no? Just straight up said, that is not going to happen, or it's not feasible, or hey, are you sure that's relevant to your audience? The power that a stakeholder has with a request is huge, and it almost gets us to forget our professionalism and the skills we have. Yeah, Sheridan, you know better than most, right? We work on culture problems, 70% of the time. Do you remember the days when we used to actually do training? I really enjoy it because it suits the world that I grew up in from an agency side of creating kind of this engaging content that's high quality and gets people excited. Robert, your boss is on the call. We'll have to ask that then. What happened the last time you said no? This could be a fun game, George and Robert. Just reading Emily's comment. Yeah, Emily, right? Learning objectives, don't get rid of them, have them, agree them with your stakeholder, get down to, okay, what will people do differently? And how do we measure that? And how will we see what's happening across the business? Try and talk about actualities, but you don't need to put it into the content. You can just say at the top, hey, this is going to help you do these things better. Bang, open it. Cool. Right. Yeah. If we did a whole project with a retailer that I won't mention. It was a 20-minute piece of e-learning with films and everything. The outcome of this was, if you see any damage on a wall, ring the asbestos line in case it's asbestos. Like, they had this whole background of the history of asbestos and types of asbestos, and literally it could have been just a poster. If you see any damage, ring this number, because we don't want you to touch it or do anything. We just want to know that there's damage so we can investigate it. And that's where stuff gets mixed up in sometimes, and we create content that just doesn't need to exist. Kim, if you know what, I need to do the same to identify and walk away from a gig. Because I've definitely been in those situations, and you sit there and you go, well, I can do it slightly better than someone else would, so maybe I can guide them on the way, but you know that it's kind of going against your principles. So I really want to be able to get to that point. Yeah, Robert, right? So the understanding a vision, right? Hey, we want you to do this because the CEO stood up last week and said it's part of our strategy for next year. So if you want your bonus, it makes sense, right? That's a bit of a blunt connection. But if you can tie that into why people are at their jobs, they might just want to get paid and maybe get their bonus and have some cake and go on holiday. But we can play to that if that's the culture of the business. If the culture of the business is to get each other fired because they can one up each other, you can play on that. You can take any kind of culture and adjust how you approach your content and how you present it. It's almost like, taking like leadership, which will have a pretty common theme no matter what you look at it, but it's how you put that front end on it to connect with your audience, which is why it crosses over with comms all the time. Lewis, yeah, communities of practice. I absolutely understand and get the value of those. I'm rubbish at that stuff, but I know people who are really, really good at it. And anytime that comes up where there's no social aspect of the learning, first thing I do is like ring someone and be like, how can we get that in? Or how can I get you in to help build it? It makes such a difference that it's like that old trope of being a manager, like creating it so you can step away and not be there and it survives without you. And that's obviously the long-term kind of dream from my perspective of self-determination theory, where can we create these people who are mature enough and capable of planning their own learning journeys that we can just step back and just present them with opportunities, and they can pick and choose what they do and grow, and everyone's challenging and changing and moving the business forwards. But it all starts with clear goals and clear problems. And you have to kind of dial it back from there. So yeah, this is my 4-part way to use insight with your learning design, and just how it can cut some of the crap away and stop us delivering stuff that doesn't matter or stuff that's irrelevant, stuff that doesn't add value. Because that's really what we're here to do. And yeah, that's kind of the future of L&D, right? We're going to have smaller budgets, but we're going to have to deliver measurable impact and real change. And it's time that we adjusted how we worked using other industries and the ideas out there. All this stuff is borrowed from other places, and bring it in and kind of test it and try and figure out a way to make L&D more effective. So that's me. And thank you very much. And I'll have a look through these last few comments. And yeah, if there's any questions, please ask. Terry, you're in the States. What time is it there? I can warn anybody who's trying to be there in a 5-year-old though. 5 minutes to 7. Tim, Terry, sorry. Thank you for getting up and joining us. I hope you've got a good, strong coffee. Well, thank you. I'm glad. But yeah, being you're in a 5-year-old and challenging everything can get you sacked. I don't do very well in internal roles because I don't like the status quo, and I'm always challenging. It's like, why does that exist? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And oddly, it upsets people. I work really, really well externally, just being an instigator and someone who just kind of challenges to kind of create ideas. So there's a time and a place to be difficult, I think. I never learned to be in my place. Sam, yeah, are there any questions in the Q&A, or have I missed that?
No, to be honest, Matt, I think that the chat has been super engaging, and I think all of the questions have been pretty much answered at the point of need. I have made a note of everything that's been put into the chat, so if anything's been missed, I can share it with you. Yeah. It seems like we're probably coming to the end from a question perspective. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to say thanks very much. It's been a really great, really insightful webinar. It's great to see so much interaction on the chat. Just for everybody who is still in attendance, the webinar recording will be uploaded to the Slack channel fairly shortly after we finish recording. And Matt, if you're okay to share the slide deck with me as per the requests, I can also put that onto the Slack channel so people can take that. And
absolutely. And the first time working with the Learning Network, I'm a fully paid up member, so I can join. I can go in the Slack group and join in as well with the chat.
Absolutely. You can watch your own webinar.
I will not be doing that. Thank you for the offer.
Okay, awesome. I think with that, I think that pretty much brings us to the end.
Yeah.
So yeah. Thank you again. It's a really, really great webinar, Matt. It's been brilliant, and thanks everyone for joining us. Yeah,
thank you. And please just reach out on LinkedIn or email or anywhere if you've got any questions or you just want to chat, because I love geeking out about this stuff. And thank you for coming. And thanks for having me.
That's great. Cheers, Matt. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you all soon.
Bye.